engage with those arenas and voices that promote regressive and discomforting narratives, regardless of the content and impact of these communications, their significance, and the pattern of their effects, if any, need to be considered to the extent that simple recognition is an important political goal for political actors. The different media of popular culture provide a means by which this need can be satisfied, while simply being seen in and of itself is rarely translated into an acknowledgement of the legitimacy of one's interests or action on behalf of those concerns. Pop culture's ability to render the invisible or the unheard audible, or possibly, to borrow from Ellison and Fred Montel, the invisible audible and the unheard visible gives it a certain political legitimacy. In those instances where recognition itself is sorry, the intended endpoint of political activity, cultural politics often might suffice. Finally, popular culture's ability and tendency to redefine the political and cross the gendered and racialized borders distinguishing the public and private realms should not be overlooked, nor should its status with regard to questions of political economy. It is extremely rare, though not impossible, for actions undertaken by creative artists alone to bring about specific substantive public policy reorientations on the part of state authorities. Rather, the discursive disruptions artists instigate and the meanings read into their actions and creations are most likely to have a more diffusive symbolic impact, at least in the external domain. Although music, films, and books are capable to some degree of generating attention around a specific issue, generally, popular culture is about the mobilization of broader and less coherent sentiments. At the same time, political movements and campaigns' effectiveness is achieving particularly policy objectives. In achieving particular policy objectives, is affected by the broader atmospheric and symbolic discourses taking place. Indeed, it could be argued that the development of broader solidaristic sensibilities, which are crucial to sustaining a progressive politics in an era of neoliberal individualism, individuation, sorry, is best accomplished by means of the actions of creative artists. Some sing, some dance, function, form, and domain. One of the important functions popular culture has played has involved providing location for the discussions of issues of concern and the making of black politics. This role became even more significant over the course of the decades following the civil rights era because of the marked transformation of the accessible, structured spaces for intramural black discourse. Indeed, some analysts have suggested that a viable black counter public has not existed for the last 3 decades. Such a public sphere did exist within the black community as recently as early 1970s, end quote, observed Michael Dawson in the mid 1990s. If by that we mean a set of institutions, communication network, and practices which facilitate debate of causes and remedies to the current combination of political setbacks and economic devastation facing major segments of the black community and which facilitate the creation of oppositional formations and sites, close quote, as a result of the processes unleashed by the civil rights movement, though he asserted, so, open quote, a black public sphere does not exist in contemporary America, close quote. Although he would later modify this claim somewhat and refer to the black counterpublic as, open quote, severely undermined and being in a state of disintegration. Although black dialogical spaces and media were significantly reordered over the course of the 1970s, it was only toward the end of this period that previously marginalized constituencies within the black community were able to mobilize and develop their own communicative networks. The concerns of African American women, gays, and lesbians, and, mhm, and lower income cohorts rose to the surface, if only briefly in some instances, in a way that was largely impossible during the supposed glory days of the black public sphere that Dawson and others have highlighted. A more accurate account might suggest that the conventional wisdom equates the viability and efficacy of black deliberative autonomy with the promotion of the interests of primarily straight middle class men and overlooks constituencies. This revised narrative is also suggestive in the same way that the coincidence of implosion of the left in the United States and the peak of the civil rights movement provokes questions about American progressiveness. What does it mean that the black public sphere, to use Dawson's terminology, is seen as collapsing at the same time that lower income constituencies, women, lesbian, and gays start to mobilize? That said, one might argue that black spaces continue to operate under constant pressure of erasure while resisting the assertion that an across the board collapse of some sort occurred at some point in the 1970s. With regard to the activities taking place in these reconfigured public spaces, it is important not to exaggerate distinction between external and internal dimensions of the politics popular culture nexus in the shaping and expression of African American politics. The blurring of the clear lines that demarcated black spaces is one of the legacies of the civil rights movement. There is currently a limited ability for blacks to discuss issues in arenas not accessible to others. Black life has, in many respects, become intensely public, partly as a result of the dramas that unfolded in the early 1990s, featuring in quick and painful succession Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill, Rodney King, O.J. Simpson, among others. Accordingly, the actor director Charles Dutton recalls that the singer Dionne Warwick told him she left before the completion of her performance of August Wilson's play, The Piano Lesson, in which he was appearing because, quote, he couldn't take it anymore. We're letting white folks in on all of our sacred little things, end quote. We're letting white folks in on all our sacred little things. Oh. To some extent, similar concerns underpin the controversies surrounding the popular 2002 film Barbershop and the mocking references made by one of its lead characters to Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Jesse Jackson. Quote, I was surprised it went straight to the media, noted O'Shea Ice Cube Jackson, one of the film stars. This translucence is Of course, not entirely new. Consider Booker T.
What's that film?
Hmm?
What's that film?
What's that?
Barbershop.
You watched it already?
No what's that?
You watched it already. A Friday the nice one.
Hmm?
Friday the nice one. But watch up alright. This translucent is of course not entirely new. Consider Booker T. Washington's double performance in Atlanta in 1895. Washington's simultaneous engagement of Southern black and white audiences with his famous exposition speech downplaying the importance of civil rights while in a lower register encouraging black economic autonomy exemplifies a problematic Clyde Taylor has identified, quote, the speaker in this position attempts to master a language and thematic understandably by the majority while also speaking to affirm values and interests of the Enos group, con- close quote, continuing, Taylor asks a question that underpins most of the anxieties regarding Black life and discourse played out in public, and that animated most of the analysis of Washington's speech. Quote, which of two masters does this text most effectively serve? Close quote. In this respect, in this respect, the Atlanta address and the responses it generated and Washington's subsequent internationally public role through the Tuskegee machine in promoting a script which sought to restrict the substantive contours of black discourse foreshadowed later developments in the post civil rights era, while Washington operated in a period in which black politics and popular culture remained largely behind the veil. To use the boy terminology, developments in the last 2 decades of the 20th century fundamentally challenge any assumption about the sanctity of the black counter, counter public, white public sphere, divide and pervert even deeper concerns with respect to the implications of black deliberative engagements and performances being accessible to non-black audiences. The remaking of the racial architecture that occurred post 1965 so also suggests that the traditional frameworks for discussing and distinguishing black politics and discourses might need to be abandoned or, at the very least, troubled. On a superficial level, it has long been a common practice for black actors and movements to draw on varying degrees from both the integrationalist and nationalist traditions, depending on the audience in question and the prevailing circumstances. While this is not a new phenomenon, it becomes much less remarkable and awkward after the civil rights movement. This is particularly true following the gradual domestication of the nationalist agenda as evidence in transition in emphasis from immigration in the 19th century to the support of segregated development within the United States and to the community controlled projects that emerged in the post civil rights era. The diminished coherence of integrationist stance in the face of successive white backlashes and withdrawals should also be considered as contributing factors to the decreased resonance of the integrationist nationalist divide. It is useful to recall that integrationism itself only becomes an explicit goal of organizations such as NAACP in the 1940s in the context of the struggle to disintegrate the military. Previously, the goal had been identified as a matter of achieving civil rights. Yeah, you understand everything?
Mm.
It is perhaps in the contemporary production and consumption of black cultural politics that the displacement of relatively procedural questions of location and orientation becomes most obvious. Operating in deterritorialized arenas, for example, radio, television, and the internet, that confound the older understandings of the distinction between integrated and segregated spaces. Artists in the post civil rights era have been major contributors to the recalibration of the black discourse agenda in their choices regarding whether to conform or transform, resist or embrace, confront or disengage. The distinct substantive dimensions of political and cultural existence become more salient and germane. Questions of geography and genealogy have less purchase on black thought as the inside and outside, the local, transnational, and global, and the past, present, and future become conjoined, in some respects, conflated. Moreover, beyond the cataloging of geographical presences and genealogical connections, there is a possibility of approaching black identifications conceptually as a matter of indexing a related set of sensibilities that resist yeah, 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 that resist quantification, physical or temporal classifications, and corporal boundaries. Somebody want to talk to yourself. Your call phone. Right, guys, peace. I don't know, must have Jordan or Zachary or Stephen or Pepe or one of them grandson.